Hello, welcome to tonight's Your Call live on fecktv.com. Tonight we're going to be looking at the future of prostitution in Ireland. I'm joined today by some very special guests. I've got Mary Crilly from the Cork Sexual Violence Centre, and I've also got Councillor Catherine Clancy, Labour Councillor from the Cork City Council. We also have via telephone link Keith Dunn from the Sex Workers Alliance Ireland. Ladies and Keith, I'm going to enter the first question here and say, should Ireland criminalise clients for paying for sex? And I think I'm going to come to yourselves first, if that's okay.
I think I'd say absolutely. I mean, I look at kind of the harm that's done to women in prostitution. I think too much glamour has been put into it. I think people will look at prostitution, maybe look at some media stuff, look at what women are supposed to be earning. They glamorise it, and that's not the reality. Like, why I'm involved in this, and we're involved in it in the centre since 2007, and we're happy that there is a Turn Off Red Light campaign, that there's a lot more centres involved. But I'm in the Rape Crisis Centre, which is now the Sexual Violence Centre, for 30 years. And the centre is 30 years this year. And over that time, I've met many women who, for some reason, had to go into prostitution for financial gain, for addictions, for various reasons. I mean, let's get real. The research and everything I've seen shows that the most vulnerable of society are working in prostitution. They're being used and they're being abused. The figures show that women, at different times, women in prostitution have been gang raped 29% of the time and raped 42% of the time. It is about organised crime. It's about profit, it's about money. It's not about two people doing something consensual and one passing money. It is a human rights issue, and it is about looking at this situation of prostitution and saying, is it okay if a young girl finds herself in dire need or for some other reason goes into prostitution? Is that okay for our sisters and our daughters or other people? I don't think it is. It does do a lot of harm.
I suppose, do you see, though, any side of it that isn't like that? I mean, there must be a side. There is obviously the organisation like Sway out there who do represent people within the sex work field. Do you see that there is, I suppose, a side to it where it isn't, what you've just described, that there is a side, maybe perhaps in the minority, but certainly there is another side to it where people do feel that they're safe within their work. It's something that they've chosen themselves, that side of things.
But even say that they're safe in their work, what is prostitution from start to finish? It's an abuse. How is it right in this day and age to be able to buy another human being? I mean, the pimps and people speak about them as merchandise. If you look at the kind of websites, the Escort Ireland, those other websites, people will say that prostitution is about somebody going in, having straight sex and coming out, and that's the end of it. If you look at the website, you see exactly what it's about, because there's a side page where the men kind of, they say what happened, and they kind of review the women they went into. They actually order a takeaway. They kind of order, this size, this type, this age, this nationality, what they can do. But what's really horrific on the side part of it is kind of talking about what they can do to this girl. Like, say, she didn't like this, but you can push it, you can force it. It's really very different to what we imagine. I'm not saying there isn't some decent, nice guys going in there, but I think the whole idea of going in to purchase somebody is off the wall. It's not.
Can I ask you, in terms of women that choose prostitution, like, I know there was a documentary on Irish TV within the last while, and it actually featured women who openly said that, they were prostitutes and they had no problem having that as their career path. They found that it was actually a really good money maker for them, and they didn't say that every person that came in was abusive, as in they were claiming that any man that came in, they did their business and then left.
I just really question that word choice. I mean, if it is a choice, why isn't it in every secondary school as a career? It's not a career.
Well, it's currently illegal, that's why it's not classed as a career.
It's actually classed as a career in Amsterdam, in Holland. It is actually a career choice within the government agencies, as brothel worker is a legitimate career.
What I mean is a choice. We're talking about choice.
Yeah.
If you had a choice for different girls of what you want to be, did they want to go to college? Did they want to go into media? Did they want to go into journalism? Did they want to be a nurse? Did they want to be a prostitute? That's choice to me. Now, and the majority of women who we've come across, and that research has been done both by the Immigrant Council and Turn Off the Red Light, will show that the minority of women might say that they're for their own reasons, and women have often said once they came out of it that they had to say this, they had to portray this, or else they wouldn't be able to do what they had to do that night. let's get, you know, it's
well,
not
this woman
a glamorous
was
kind of a situation.
saying like she had absolutely no problems because they pressed her on that same issue, and she was insisting that this was her choice, and
she might be
she
the
wasn't.
majority. I'm not saying that doesn't happen with some, but the majority of cases,
Keith,
it's run by organised crime.
If I can bring you in for a minute, Keith, are you there?
I'm here, yeah.
Keith, do you happen to have an opinion on what Mary's been saying so far?
Yeah, well, there's a few points I'd like to bring up there. First of all is saying that Sway is opposed to the criminalisation of clients and of the Swedish model. We feel that it will put women or sex workers, both men and women, in more danger. This has been found to be the case, or believed to be the case, in both Sweden and Norway. In relation to freedom of choice, I was talking to a couple of sex workers today. I don't know whether one of them is the one you're referring to from the documentary. And they claim one of them is from England and the other one is from Romania. And they both entered it out of freedom of choice. They've been working in it in years, both in the UK, Ireland, Spain, and in other places. In relation to one of the women, she worked as a sex worker, went into a relationship with a man, stopped working as a sex worker, worked in a regular bar, cafe place, and then after the relationship broke up, she went back to sex working. She's paid more as a sex worker, has more control over her hours and her situation than she did while working in a bar. I also talked to another Irish sex worker who now works in the United Kingdom, and she has been working on and off in Ireland for the past 20 years and has never found anyone who has been coerced or forced into prostitution. In relation
Keith,
to the idea...
Sorry, I do apologise. Yeah. Can I just cut you off and bring Mary in to just have a bit of an answer, I suppose, to what Keith's just said there?
What I'm saying, even about the force, I mean, we're in a situation where 10 to 20% of the women and girls in prostitution are trafficked into this country. And I know a lot of organisations don't want to, you know, put trafficking and prostitution in the same breath. They try and keep it separate, but it is the reality. Women are trafficked in for prostitution because all prostitution is about, in the majority of cases, is run by organised crime. It's worth billions. It's about financial gain. And yes, in Amsterdam, I've talked to different people, and the pimps talk about the women as merchandise. And when, you know, when stuff was legalised there, my merchandise went up by 50, 60%. Yes, and there was young women who were unemployed and would go to the equivalent of a FOSS office or something like that and would be told, you know, you need to go for this job. Is that where we want to be? Is the whole thing...
Can I get in there one point about relation to jobs and people, if you will, being forced by the government if it is seen as a legitimate case? There was a case similar to that in Germany a few years ago where a woman was told by a job agency that she had to take a job as, basically a sex worker. This was retracted at a later point because the agency or the business had falsely put in the claim of it being bar work. So in Germany, you are not, if you will, forced to take on employment as a sex worker if you choose not to. Sure. Ireland currently has no scheme in which people are forced to take any job in relation to in fear of getting their dough cut. There's a separate debate about that in Ireland. It's completely unrelated. Okay. But currently that is not the case. Also in New Zealand, sex agencies aren't allowed to advertise openly for sex work. New Zealand is generally held up as a model by the UN and other agencies as basically the ideal model. And a recent report by the UN basically said that New Zealand is the model that all countries should follow in relation to sex work and prostitution.
Okay, thank you for that, Keith. I actually just want to sort of bring something in. I'm going to bring yourself in now, if I may, Catherine. Part of what we were talking about here was, and Keith mentioned it himself, was the Swedish model. And that is something, if I can elaborate it to the viewers out there, it essentially means that the clients who would be paying for sexual services would be the ones who would face criminal charges, not the prostitutes themselves, in the sort of a nutshell of it. That's something that the campaign Stop the Red Light is campaigning for, and it's something that yourself, Catherine, pushed through the Cork City Council, and it's now gone to a higher level to be debated in Ireland. What are your own feelings on that?
Well, I suppose we have different models around the world, how different countries have dealt with prostitution, and you have debates as to whether you should legalise it or whether you should make the person who buys sex criminalise the act. But in the end of the day, my involvement, first of all, I suppose, as a public representative and raising it at Cork City Council, was to highlight the Turn Off the Red Light campaign. And for me, I suppose the main thing is that when you look at countries like Holland, that, you know, have much more free approach to the whole issue of prostitution, you actually know, we believe, and figures tell us, that it is now the hub of the world for actually trafficking. And there is a direct connection between trafficking of women and children and men to do with the prostitution trade. And just alone we have figures that tell us, like, and this to me is very frightening, and we can gloss up prostitution, and we can gloss up consent, and we can gloss up that it's a business or you know, for people that they actually have of choice, and it's a good way to make money. But the reality is it's a big criminal activity, and CAB figures tell us alone last year in Ireland that was 250 million of an intake of an industry for people, and that, like, you have children now being trafficked, and we had 29 children in the last 3 years who were identified as being trafficked in Ireland for prostitution. And they're figures that have been detected, because the whole thing about the activity to do with prostitution now, it is no longer visible, and it's very, very much a hidden trade.
Do you think, I mean, trafficking is one thing I wanted to bring up. Do you think that bringing in the Swedish laws, as we'll call them here, do you think that will stop the trafficking in Ireland? Do you
well,
think
I think, it's, as people will say, like, and it can't be as naive to think that you can actually do away with prostitution. It's the oldest business since time began, and I think no matter what we will do, there will always be, this is my belief, that there will always be prostitution. But that, you know, what we find in countries where they have criminalised the purchaser, it has seen a reduction in the activity, and it's not seen as
more of a marking, like a hiding of the statistics, because they've become more hidden in where they carry out the acts.
No, I think what it is, like, these are business people running this, and they'll go, and it probably mightn't solve the problem in other parts of the world, but what we have to do is try and solve the problem in Ireland. And I think by making it a criminal act, that we actually, it's a deterrent for people who want to start that type of business.
This is actually one thing that I want to bring up on, because these were the sort of the issues that I had with the Swedish model as such, is that, yeah, you're absolutely right that since Sweden brought the measures in 1999, the amount of prostitutes working has dropped, the amount of trafficking itself has dropped in the country. But there are two sort of counter figures that are quite interesting there. That Sweden now has one of the highest rape rates in Europe. It's had it's had the trebling of reported rape cases has trebled between 2003 2010. Whilst the prostitution may have gone down, the cases of sexual violence seem to have dramatically increased. And this
such a myth that I have been hearing for years.
It is a figure-based myth from the Swedish government.
But even bringing that in, you know, about the increase in rape, I don't know, many times we would have heard that over the years, if there's more prostitutes, there'll be less rape. That is not true. But one thing I do want to say about prostitution is that the women we've talked to, and the women who, you know, have worked with Hama, who've worked with women for years, most of them are working in the industry from the age of 15. I mean, the men who are the men who are using them want young girls. They want them kind of quite young. They want like a takeaway. So,
yeah. Sorry, I'm going to bring Keith in after you finish your point.
It's the demand that's creating this. Okay, you stop something, there will be a certain amount of underground. Not everything will go underground. Organised crime want to make money. If they can't make it here, they will go elsewhere. But it's the whole thing of harm is being done to women and young girls every day of the week.
And that's a point I want to make. If you're, if you're going to put this law in place, or you want the law to criminalise it in this country, and you're saying that you want to stop the harm, and you want to stop the trafficking, and you want to stop that, what they've found in Sweden is that whilst the law has done this, all it has done is push that trafficking to other countries. So it said, right, we're fine in Sweden, we don't have a problem in this country anymore, but that's gone to other countries. It doesn't stop the source of the trafficking.
The source of trafficking, but the source of trafficking is to do with the men, the affluent white male in this country who's prepared to buy it, and in other countries.
What you're saying is it would just shift it somewhere else.
Well, then it's up to them to deal with it.
But that's just saying it's not our problem. Would you not rather attack the source of where these people are coming in from? Would you not rather beef up security at borders, for instance?
You have to look at why they're coming in. You can do anything you want at all the borders. But you still have all these men queuing up saying, I want a young girl tonight, or a man of 60 saying, I want a 17-year-old girl. They're creating the demand. So if you stop the demand,
but if you stop the supply of that, you also decrease the demand as well.
You see, even when we talk supply,
can I just bring Keith in for a second?
That word you use, stop the supply.
A couple of points there. First of all, is this idea, which is
I do agree, and I do think that's a horrible thing. But I'm going to bring Keith in. Keith, come on in.
First of all, a point that has been made repeatedly, and it's basically the crux of the entire argument to bring in the Swedish model, is that it reduces prostitution, be it voluntary or involuntary. There's little evidence of that from Sweden, and there's absolutely no evidence of that at all from Norway. In Sweden, it is quite often cited that prostitution has decreased, or some figures say up to 50%. This relates to street prostitution, which was legal in Sweden up until the ban. Street prostitution in Ireland is illegal as it currently stands, so it's unlikely to see a difference there. In relation to indoor prostitution, two reports, one from the Department of Health and Welfare in Sweden, has claimed that they have no idea how many numbers there are working as sex workers in Sweden. And a police report from 2010 has said that prostitution and trafficking have increased in the country over the past 10 years. There's also, in this past year, last year, there was high-profile media attention cases of trafficking in Sweden, including, and they've uncovered the biggest trafficking ring they've ever done in Sweden.
Keith, I'm going to bring in the two ladies here to just sort of talk a little bit about what you've just said, and I think Catherine, you're going to jump in on that.
I suppose Keith now has come in with figures, and I think it's interesting that Keith has figures from Sweden, because if we didn't have the criminalisation of prostitution in Sweden, then we wouldn't have figures. And I suppose what these figures are telling us, whether we agree with them or don't agree with them, is that now we have some, so I suppose we have it been monitored because it is now a crime. And maybe if we had other countries...
Alternatively, though, you could say if it was not a crime but regulated by government agencies, then you would have those figures themselves, as in Amsterdam, for instance.
I'd say his figures are wrong. You know, we've talked to people from Sweden now. I think we could have an argument back and forward about this. But I'm not going there.
If we drop the figures themselves...
I'm not going to this intellectual argument, because I think we need to really come back to basics.
Well, that's fine.
Would you like it for your sister? Would you like it for your friend? Would you like it for your girlfriend? We need to come back and look at human beings.
But that's looking at it from a very emotive, very, very moral argument. We're talking a bit essentially about a legal one.
I suppose, Chris, if we can say, no matter what way you want to style this argument up here tonight, we really have to bring it back that we're talking about human beings. You know,
and that's, I suppose, if I do want to bring it back that way, if I shall bring it back to the human beings, then in terms of bringing these laws in, do you think that it would actually create a safer environment for those who are still out on the streets once the law has been brought in? Say the law was brought in tomorrow, for instance, for those prostitutes and sex workers who are still on the streets, who do not give it up, who do not rescind from the life after the law has been brought in, do you think it makes it safer for them to be still out working, shall we say?
I think you're talking about a very limited amount of people when you actually talk in that frame, but when you actually talk about the whole on monitoring or the actual decriminalisation of prostitution, you're in a different game altogether. Like what you're talking about is actually making it acceptable to actually traffic children, women and boys, and and men. And we actually, as a country, have to send out a clear message that it's not acceptable in Ireland. And as Mary was saying earlier, like, you know what I mean, you can say you're moving it on to the next country, but that's not a good enough point to say that you don't deal with it in your own area. You know.
Sorry, Keith.
And I think it also gives women a chance to exit it. That's the whole thing. Yes. How many women working in the industry have ever been given the opportunity to exit? They're trapped. That's the reality of women in prostitution.
I agree with you there that you would provide some form of exit because it would be essentially a legal force there. But sort of in terms of the safety on the streets, I mean, this is again from Sweden.
Most prostitution takes part in apartments and happens in apartments, and that's not because of the safety of the women. That's because the men, the buyers, want to go into a cosy apartment, do their business, and then get out. I think you need to come back a bit. You know, you can because I know you can kind of argue all night on this model or that model.
No.
You really need to come back. Like, look at women and girls when they are in prostitution. Look how they're treated. Look what they're called. They're whores. They're sluts. They're just your one. They don't matter. They're worse. They're lowest of the lowest in society.
What do you say to the people who?
And I mean, these men who walk in, who can go in to a woman every night of the week, or this woman has to be available for all these men, and they can come out and pull up their pants, and that's another notch in their belt, and they've done fine work, but she's a whore, she's a slut.
What do you say to the people who look at the argument as
all the time.
It comes across as the whole argument for criminalising it is coming from a conservative religious background?
I'm looking at it, I'm coming from the basis of working in the Sexual Violence Centre for 30 years and seeing women all in those years who've worked in prostitution, who've been single parents, who've been on drugs, who've been in different situations, who just couldn't cope, and the harm that is done for them. Either women who've been flung out of cars or have been raped, or maybe not that kind of violence happening, but over the time of being with different men and having to do what was asked of them, it's just not what they could deal with, and that's the harm that's been done. And the thing is, does anybody have a question, why is there need for this? Why should young girls and women be just available for men every night of the week? Why should there be 1,000 women at the moment working in Ireland in prostitution to be available for men? Why? What's their need?
Can I just come in?
Keith, I'd like you to come in on this, please.
Yeah, for a little bit. First of all, you're on about a moral issue there, whether prostitution is right or wrong. I think you said earlier on, I'm going to agree with everyone, that prostitution is going to continue regardless of what law we pass, as it has continued in Sweden, Norway and also Iceland. So the question is, how do you protect the women which are working as sex workers? And this law has been proven and has been reported by surveys done of sex workers in both Sweden and Norway to make them feel more in danger. We've seen an increase in violence in Norway against sex workers since law has come in. They're more reluctant to go to the police, mainly to do with an operation called Operation Homeless, which is effectively forcing them out of their apartments. They also say that while some clients are also deterred by the law, it's more the nicer clients which are deterred by the law. The more dangerous clients, the one which would be more likely to attack and rape, are not affected by this law. So therefore, they will continue. So sex workers have reported they have to take on more dangerous clients and also do more, if you will, more unusual sexual activities in order to get more clients and to get more money. So you're not protecting any sex workers by this law.
But I don't think he's saying it's a choice. I think he's got a point there that do you mind if I just finish my point? Sorry, Mary, I don't want to cut across you, but do you mind if I just finish this? I think what Keith is trying to say here, though, if you put a law like this in, what you're essentially doing is creating more competition for less clients. So you've got less men will go to the sex workers who are there, the ones who are still remaining on the street. That means that their prices are lowering, that if they are going to have to try and make a living from this, that the potential for doing things that they would not normally have done with their clients who were there before but have now been scared off by the law increases. Their deals in terms of where they do it have to be quicker. They have to be off the streets, for instance, because of the fear of the police arresting the client and therefore reducing, obviously, their wage, their job. So it does. You know, what Keith is saying is it increases the danger.
Where are you going with this? That's airy-fairy. That's totally.
How is that airy-fairy if there is? And I do back Keith up on that one point, that there is statistics, there is research that comes from the countries that have this law that does say it's more dangerous.
There's also research from the police in Sweden, and I've gone to different conferences with them who would totally disagree with that, who are on the ground and saying that is not true, that in Sweden, in their area, that things have changed, because you want to change the mind frame of the men who are using them. Because, you know, you take a man going in tonight, and I bet you if he had his friend with him, and if his friend said, I'm going in there tonight now because your sister is on tonight and she's a great ride, the friend would probably freak and say, you're not going near my sister. You know, we have to look at what we're doing. These are young girls, they're people's sisters, people's friends, people's nieces. And I mean, those figures that he's giving one stand, but I think all I'm getting from Keith is this intellectual stuff. He doesn't look at them like human beings. And I won't use the word sex workers, that's glamorising it. It's women who've been pushed into this at the age of 15, up to 20% in this country being trafficked right now. And if we legalise it, organised crime, we're going to think all our birthdays and Christmases have come together. That's the reality of it.
I know you don't want to look at models, Anna. People in the Zurich and surrounding areas in Germany also address this issue. And like you've already said, even if laws come in here, prostitution is going to continue. So in an attempt to curb it in some way and get some sort of laws around it.
Change the men, change their mind frame, make them look at these people as human beings, make them think...
But it's never going to be that straightforward. So what they've decided to do is introduce drive-in...
You're two men. Why do men walk into a brothel?
To have sex. I think that's pretty obvious.
Why do they need to buy it? Why do they need to use another human being to do whatever they want to do?
Well, we could get into a long, drawn-out argument about... I think we could get into a long, drawn-out point about that.
Young men.
Can I come
Sorry,
in
Keith, bring it in. I suppose he's a young man as well.
Yeah, third man.
But first of all, there are many different reasons why a man would choose to go to a sex worker. I won't go into those just yet, but I want to point out this idea that has reduced demand in Sweden. There's also no evidence of this at all. Actually, a radio station, I think it was in 2009, 2010, put up adverts, fake adverts online, advertising sex workers. They got thousands of replies from it. In Norway, they have reported an increase in prostitution between figures from 2010 to 2011 of 28%. I checked out previous to coming on here, popular Norwegian escort site, and it had more female sex workers advertising in Oslo than were advertising on a similar site in Dublin. So this idea that it reduces demand is simply untrue. Also, it makes certain situations more dangerous for sex workers dealing with clients, as mentioned earlier on. One of them is that they now have to go to demands houses effectively, so they're less able to control their area. This is one thing that's been raised, particularly in Norway, from sex workers, that they feel more in danger. There's also been reports in relation to street prostitution of having to drive further out of the city to industrial parks and do the act there, where they're less likely to be detected. There is no proof at all that that it has reduced demand or it has really changed attitudes in Sweden to any real extent. Also, this idea that it's only men buying women is also untrue. There was a documentary on, I think documentaries, but on VDF, which is a German television station, looking at male sex workers in Bali, and it found Swedish women going over there to purchase sex, whether going over just to purchase sex or to haven't been holidays anyhow in purchasing sex. So this idea that
Keith, I'm going to bring the ladies back in. I think you do have a point there that he does have a point that it isn't just women who buy sex. That the men buy men and men buy women.
And if you look at all those instances and where men and women are buying sex, they are buying sex off of where it's organised criminal activity, where young boys and young girls are being sold as a product by people who are actually running a huge business in that. We have people from all over the world who travel to Thailand and have sex with young boys, and do we say that's okay?
No, sorry,
child prostitution is illegal in Ireland and pretty much every country in the world.
It may be illegal, but we have figures that tell us in the last 3 years, Keith, that 29 children were detected who were actually brought into Ireland and were trafficked into Ireland, believing to be for the sex industry. And they're actually figures that we know about, and these are ones that have been detected. It's a very, very hard industry to actually find out what exactly is happening.
Trafficking more than prostitution, because everybody on both sides of the argument keep raising up trafficking. But should we not be focusing on, that as opposed to like the prostitution, even if it's, whatever measures are brought forward, the trafficking is going to continue. It'll be just even more hidden. So should the government not be focusing on what to do there?
The human trafficking unit set up in the Department of Justice about 3 years ago, and we're members of it. And there is kind of huge work being done on trafficking, but it goes back to the whole thing of why is there trafficking? Why are 800,000.
But as you've already said already, the
women and
prostitution's
children.
not going to
And
stop.
actually-
It's
and
the
actually
trafficking that will get
traffic
shadier.
takes
place
trafficking
not for
because
sex as
of
well.
the
I just do
demand.
need to make that point
Sorry.
that trafficking does take place. That it's that
Yes.
all trafficking is not just sex. That
For
there are
labour,
there are
yeah.
labour
Yeah,
trafficking.
The
That's
majority of
right,
women and children is
I agree.
sex
In,
trade.
if we're going to come back to this then
and it's
and
all
look
to
at
do with the demand.
okay, we're going to look at that in that case. The final question then is, when we look around this, I just need to bring in a tweet that was said here just to clarify this, that rape in Sweden is counted differently. For example, parental disputes over a child are counted in the rape figure. The rape figures are not representative. Whilst that is true, the amount of rapes that have been reported in terms of the massive increase there, that is correct, regardless of what
What's
there's
it got to do with prostitution?
It's
That's
a tweet, sorry, it's come from someone
But I
outside.
suppose, Chris,
It's
what you
come
should
from
say, that's
outside.
a crime in its own right.
That's a
That is
crime in
actually
its own
separate.
right,
And,
absolutely.
and if there is
What
an
I'm
increase in
yeah.
people being raped in Sweden, that is a
Yeah.
really serious
Well, the
worry. That's
prostitution has gone
increased.
down.
But that
Absolutely.
you're connected to prostitution is...
Well, the connection is
There's no
sort of there.
connection.
But you raised the point earlier that a lot of
Yeah.
people who are prostitutes are
prostitution
getting
are raped.
raped. So there is a connection.
So there's a
I
connection
know
there.
that's in their workplace. That's
No, but
actually
exactly, but there's
Yes, but there is a
people are
connection.
getting raped, so the rapes are
Fair
still
game.
there, but they're just not classed as prostitutes anymore.
But
the
to make
rapes
the
are still
argument,
happening,
but to make the
and they've
argument that
actually
we continue
increased.
prostitution to stop rape happening in the street is...
No, I'm not saying it's. I'm not saying you should I'm not saying you should legalise it to stop rape. But I'm simply saying that as the figures have shown, that the amount of rapes being reported since prostitution has gone in have increased.
Yeah.
But
and maybe
this
since
is for,
prostitution was criminalised in Sweden, maybe there's been a lot more house break-ins as well, and maybe there's been a lot more people knocked down by a bus, and
Well, I
lots more
think
people
that's-
knocked down by...
I think that's a slight skewing of the
No, but I'm not.
statistics
But I'm
there.
saying, like,
the
you know...
figures on both sides of the argument.
Yeah.
As
It
in,
does.
you could equally
Yeah.
argue then if you criminalise prostitution to the hilt in Ireland, then nothing's going to change anyway.
Criminalise the
Can I-
demand. Criminalise the
Can I
men
put
who
a
think it's
question
okay
for the
Sorry.
ladies
to a
there
young girl.
to move away
Keith,
from...
you have a question?
Yeah, I know. Quickly, if a woman or a man decides to sell sex, do you think they should have a right to do that, and do you think they should be able to do that without interference from the government or the police or other groups?
Organisations. It's a fair question,
Yeah,
I suppose.
I absolutely don't, because I don't think I want this for the future of any young Irish girl or young Irish boy coming up. And I think if Ireland decides to legalise it and to let all these thousands of men who are walking in tonight into a place throw the money down and do what they want to any young girl or young boy, I'd really feel like leaving the
would that
country,
mean then
because
I
it is
suppose
a
you would
human
be-
right.
But why should you stop a
Against
woman or a man who
free
wants to do
choice
that?
and free will. I mean, for instance, if it was legalised, if it was a set system where there was complete government control, where there was far more essential stopping of trafficking, if this was a situation where government could come into these, just to come into these brothels, could regulate it and look at it, and it was in that case I shall bring it back, I suppose, to yourself for the moral argument. Would you morally say that if two people were making a clear consensual choice that both of them were absolutely okay in terms of paying for sex, would you say that that moral choice that they've made is wrong?
I think people make those choices different nights and different times, but you're talking, you can't just bring it down to that, because you're talking about a situation which
But is it wrong, though? Is it a yes or no,
extremely
is it wrong?
serious. For buying anybody, for purchasing a human being, you know, I mean, purchasing sex is very clinical.
But beside
You're
that, if
purchasing a
two
human
people
being.
have morally decided that they're going
purchase a human
to...
being,
But if both morally agree on
but
it...
how
Yeah.
could they? Because the purchaser has the power. Like, give me a break here. The person who's...
But if this person has openly said, I don't mind this
The
job, I have
person
chosen
who's
this job,
putting-
they're not forced into it
They're not
in any way,
forced,
they've
yeah.
agreed to it,
Can you
it's
tell
still
me
morally
that
wrong.
anybody would be doing
the
it for
money
nothing?
down,
But-
yeah,
but
They're getting
has-
paid,
Yes,
but they've
and-
chosen
and-
this
Yeah.
career path.
The person who's putting the money
Yes,
down
right.
has the power. Let's get real here.
But I'm just saying, if that person is already...
Yeah, another point, in relation to this idea if you're buying someone, from a legal point of view, where does that idea kick in? If you take something which is legal, and I don't think there's any plan to change this, massage services. There are obviously different legal massage services.
So what did you
massage
say,
therapies you
Keith?
can take.
Repeat
So you're
that, sorry.
going. So at what point legally are you purchasing someone, to use your words, if you go into a massage parlor, get a regular kind of neck back massage, but at that point then get what's referred to as a happy ending, which would be illegal
I really
under
think,
these
I
kinds of
think on the website for massage, somebody might say they're very good and they use this kind of oils. I mean, look at the Escort Ireland website, look at what they're saying about these girls. She didn't want me to go in the back door, but you can force her boys. All these kind of lists of things where the price lists are up, it's very different. It's like purchasing something, and I'm not kind of getting into this anymore with Keith about glamorising, because that is not women's reality.
And Mary, look, I really appreciate you all coming on, and Catherine as well. I really do appreciate you. I think this is one that I don't think both sides are ever going to see eye to eye on, but it's certainly something that I do think that this country needs to have a full, open and frank and honest debate about.
I think that's been done. I mean, Alan Shatter kind of had a big conference. The debate has been done. It's now time for people to contact their TDs and kind of let them know where we're at and to support the Centre's campaign, Sexual Violence Centre, and a turn off the red light, and look at the facts and figures.
I'm not sure we can really say that everybody should support that. I think that's I think it should be. You can certainly say that.
Well, I suppose what we have, Chris, is we have 64 organisations in Ireland who actually support the turn off the red light campaign, and they actually go from the Gardaí to the Immigration Council and to different groups that actually work with vulnerable women, and you can't ignore these are groups that are on the ground.
No, but I suppose groups is one thing, but I suppose what it would have to come down to would be a referendum for the people to decide.
I think it's a subject.
The change of legislation is not going to be a referendum issue.
Well, perhaps that should be something that we put onto the cards rather than the organisations dealing it for yourself.
This for the past 5 or 6 years.
Most of these organisations, by the way, and I'm talking about the unions mainly, have not actually voted for their members at all to actually accept these rules. They've generally taken at board level meetings after consultations solely with one side of the debate. They have not had a clear debate in their own organisations about this at all. And the fact that the unions have not bothered their members about this issue, and I'm sure plenty of the members of these organisations are opposed to this law.
But they're for human rights.
Keith, thank you for that. Look, we're going to leave it there, ladies, because again, I don't think we're going to get much further. But I thank all of my guests. I thank Keith Dunn, I thank Mary Crilly, and I thank Councillor Catherine Clancy. Thank you very much for coming on. Noel, thank you as well. Check us out on fecttv.com. Thank you very much for watching.